Okay, hi guys. Bill, I unmuted you. Can you hear me? Bill Parisi, you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. So
All right.
I'm going to turn it over to you if you want to introduce Michol.
Yes, thank you, Ginger. Hey guys, welcome to today's webinar. I am super fired up and excited to be co-hosting this webinar with Michol Dalcourt, who is really a true pioneer in the fitness industry in so many ways. For the coaches that don't know Michol, or you should know him because he's a leader out there for sure, he really has been a big contributor to my understanding of fascia, to the book that we put out on fascia training a little over a year ago, and to our continued exploration and discovery of understanding fascia and fascia training. So Michol has a lot of good stories. He's been a great partner to the Parisi Speed School. He brings a wealth of knowledge. He has a company called the Institute of Motion, which he's done tremendous amounts of continued education, and we are so excited to be aligned with him and share best practices with him, and really continue to explore this.
Bill, we lost you. We lost audio on you, Bill. Michol, can you hear me?
I sure can. Yeah. Hope you can hear me okay.
Yes. Can you
Michol
hear Bill?
has some great anecdotes. I'm sorry, Ginger.
Yeah, Bill, you got cut out for a little bit.
Okay. When did I get cut out? I'm sorry about that.
I don't know, a minute ago, maybe.
Oh, shoot. So just to kind of wrap up, what I was saying is the relationship we have with Michol has been great. We're working on our second book, Fascia in Application, that Michol has been a contributor to. That's going to be out in about 6 months. And we're excited to really take advantage of the opportunity to be working with him and have him as one of our advisory board members. And today we're going to really do a deeper dive in the impact of fascia and what it has on performance and health. So with no further ado, I want to introduce Michol Dalcourt. Michol, take it away, and please feel free to elaborate on more. Like I said, I don't know if you heard my last point. Michol has a company called the Institute of Motion that he's done some tremendous education. He's put out to the marketplace, does a lot of great things in the industry. The founder of the Viper also does some tremendous education in terms of how to use the Viper. But Michol, it's all yours.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. Bill, I appreciate the kind introduction. And of course, Ginger and Randy, I appreciate you navigating all of the things that go with webinars and meetings and so forth. So I appreciate you guys in the background doing your diligent work, because it's every time we do it, and I've done a lot of these as well, it seems like something comes up. So we really appreciate the efforts and all the work that goes in front of and behind the scenes. So I just want to extend a heartfelt thanks to you guys as well. And with Bill, listen, I know that we're probably going to have more of a dialogue in here, but this is going to be great for me, and I really value our growing relationship. And what you've done in the industry is push the narrative and the accessibility of the information of fascia and training in general. You've pushed that forward. So, for me, it comes with great pleasure that I get, kind of share a voice with you today. And we're going to talk about fascia's impact on performance and health. And one thing I will say is that as a company, what we do at IOM is we really look at health and human performance. And so those two things to us are always equal in our consideration. And you'll hear me discuss most likely those elements as we navigate our conversation today. And so I believe, I'm not sure, Bill, but I believe we've got about an hour. Is that right? I don't even know.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
Perfect. So what I want to do right now in this hour is have a dialogue with you, Bill, and with the audience in the sense that we want to talk about how to uncover what fascia does to contribute to performance and health, and what are the benefits of understanding the behaviors of this tissue. I think that you've shone a light on this, and it's not the only one that matters. It's not as if the pendulum now tilts towards fascia alone. We know that, when we look at structure, biological structure, it operates in aggregates. There are redundancies. All of our systems commingle together in a very intimate way in order for us to do what we do, which is, hopefully live a relatively healthy life and, perform the tasks and the activities and the sports that we desire and that we take pleasure in. So fascia is very important as a contributor to the overall performance and well-being of our system, and we're going to talk about that today as well. And then I think more tangibly to some of the audience out there, it's understanding how this system may adapt and how we might train it, or at least consider how to train it. So that's kind of the backdrop of our conversation today. And what I'd like to do to start, if I may, is really go through a story by virtue of video and description of certain athletes. So I hope that this video is playing relatively smoothly. It is grainy, so it's not your screen. It's actually the video. This is old footage, and it is in slow motion. So that should be echoing in what you see here. But you basically see highlights of very famous athletes doing what they do. Of course, here's Jordan jumping from the key. And what's interesting about this as we take a look at it, even in slow motion, is the ability for him to get off the ground and what has been described as, defying gravity, right? And so I might even replay this video again, but when you look at it, you see him come in contact with the ground and elevate himself in a very unique way. So I'm actually going to go back and just play this video again. You got Jordan and you got Dominique Wilkins jumping in different ways relative to the basket itself. So here you see someone jumping from the top of the key. Here you see Dominique Wilkins getting underneath the basket and having to go vertical a little quicker. And so you might see a little bit more knee bend in that particular task compared to this one right here, where it's almost as if he's got some knee bend, but he doesn't want to get any more. So he comes into the ground and he's stiff. And what he does essentially is with that stiff knee position, he accelerates off of the ground and essentially, quote unquote, takes flight in the air. And what's unique about this is if we think about muscular unload, if we think about the idea of force production or even rate of force production, which is typically a nervous system and muscle action, it's not as if the muscle in Jordan's case, jumping from the top of the key, is expressing a lot of concentric force production, because we don't see a lot of knee bend and then a lot of knee straightening. We see, in a sense, a lot of stiffening into the ground. So right away, we're starting to glean that there are different ways in which to create, in this case, an athletic outcome. You got Wilkins, who's underneath the basket, who has a very demonstrative knee bend. And then you got someone jumping from the top of the key, Jordan, who's famous for that, that is really not accessing a lot more knee bend. He's staying more stiff. And so these particular scenarios will allow different elements of our body's tissue to contribute differently. And it's important for us to realize that as we go through. Now, if we just take a look at jumping in general, we often take a look at high jumpers and what they do. And so we'll be able to glean that story from two particular high jumpers in 2004 and 2007. But you look at historical footage here, and again, it's grainy and slow motion again. But you look at some historical footage here, and they used to jump more sagittally based right here, and then more in the frontal plane right here, before they realized that the transverse plane going reverse, back first, could actually allow them to jump higher, but not necessarily get their center of mass as high. In other words, because they arch over the bar going backwards, their center of mass actually never even clears the bar. It stays below the bar. So physics is all about displacing mass, and the Fosbury flop allows us to displace that mass less and still get over the bar. So we're taking a look at physical sciences interacting with biological sciences, in other words, our bodies. And what we're going to think about is how that is relevant for the tissues of the body as they, engage, as they function, as they adapt, and hopefully as we create two things. The first one is human performance, right? In this case, if we're talking about youth or sports, we're talking about high-level elite performance. And the other thing we're going to talk about is sustainability or resiliency, which we call health. So as a viewpoint, we are a company that applies health and human performance. And we want is resiliency as well as some degree of performance output. So let's take a look at this in the context of more of today's standards. What you're looking at in front of you right now is our two elite high jumpers. On the right, you've got a guy named Stefan Holm, who is from Sweden, and he was pretty good. He was the 2004 Olympic gold medalist and set several world records in his tenure in the early 2000s. And what you see to his left is a gentleman named Donald Thomas, who is the 2007 world champion. And what's interesting about these two individuals are that they jump very differently, and they take advantage of different structures within their bodies. All of them still contribute, but they index higher towards one particular structure than the other. And we're going to see that in just a moment. So if you take a look at this video, again, it'll be a little bit fragmented, but hopefully you'll get the sense of what I'm talking about just because of the streaming rate. But you see two individuals going over the bar. And what I want you to take a look at is what their takeoff is and how they get over the bar. So what you'll notice is that Stefan Holm, who jumped first, and I'll play this video again, actually, his takeoff plant, his last plant was further away from the bar than Donald Thomas, who is closer. And so what we see is one individual has to get higher or more vertical quicker. So you see his last takeoff right there, and you compare it to Donald Thomas, who is closer to the bar. Now, if someone's closer to the bar, they got to get vertical quicker. So what they're doing is they're taking advantage of a different force profile, a different, we'll say, physics, and thus their biologic system, their biomechanics tends to then shape itself differently. So their takeoff is very different, and how they get over the bar is very different. What you see is a lot more arch, a lot more technique in Stefan Holm than you do Donald Thomas, who has more quote unquote natural ability of jumping. So what we're not going to talk about here is, game day or event day psychology, which is hugely important, right? And we're not going to talk about it, but I don't want to dismiss it as being inconsequential. How we show up that day in competition is extremely relevant to the fluidity and the force production and the timing and everything else of performance. And so it has mindset has a huge determinant on performance. We will not talk about that today. Rather, what we're going to focus on is a couple of things here. I want you to take a look at the left, right? So here you've got the tail of the tape, which is Donald Thomas is about 6 feet 2 inches, or in metrics, that's 1.9 meters. He weighs about 165 pounds or 75 kilos. His best jump is 2.35 meters, which is world class. What's interesting about this gentleman right here is that his first time ever in competition was 2005, and he cleared better than the Japanese champion. And 3 months later, after his first time in competition, he got 4th in the Commonwealth Games. And he only started jumping, I believe, 2 years prior to 2005. So what we have is a situation where technique has not been refined in this gentleman. However, natural jumping ability has or does bathe his system. And so we're going to see how that comes together in just a second. What you have by comparison on the right-hand side of your screen is Stefan Olm. Now, one thing that you're going to see about him right away is, by the way, that's him in the middle winning his gold medal in Athens in 2004. And what you might see is two gentlemen on either side of him wearing a silver and a bronze, looking in the middle and thinking to themselves, why is the short guy wearing a gold medal around his neck? Because what you have is he is one of the shortest elite jumpers of all time. He's 5'9". Now, if you're a high jumping coach and you look at him and he's 5'9", you're probably thinking to yourself, he better have a pretty good vertical jump. And as we're going to see later on, that may not be the case. So if you're a coach for this individual, you might think, you know, it's important for you, Stefan Olm, to consider a different sport because you might have some pretty significant constraints. You're shorter, and what we're about to find out is he may not possess a lot of natural jumping ability if it's just jumping up and down. And so what's interesting is that he was one of the best high jumpers of all time. The question is, how does he get it done? And a big hint is going to be what we're talking about in today's webinar. So that's the big thing. Now, his best jump ever is actually beyond what you see to your left, which is Donald Thomas's jump. So he is a pretty darn good jumper. What you're going to also see right here is what has been reflected in my first video of Dominique Wilkins and Michael Jordan. So you see a takeoff angle relative to the knee that is going to be different in either case. So on the right-hand side, you see Donald Thomas, and you see the takeoff angle is a little steeper at the knee. You also see the fact that the trailing knee is behind, whereas Stefan Olm is a stiffer knee because it doesn't bend as much, and his whip leg, his driving leg, which is his right leg, the one that's furthest away from the screen, has already kicked through to create some upward momentum in his system. So his biological sciences and the physical sciences of his limbs swinging with mass and momentum and creating now a force that he can react and kind of take advantage of, they're going to be different, right? And it's not that one is bad and one is better. It's just that they are different and they're taking advantage of different things in the body relative to tissue and tissue behaviors. So this is going to be the first thing that becomes interesting for us. That is a big difference between these two jumpers. They're both trying to get over the bar. They're just doing it in slightly different ways, taking advantage.
Michol, can I make a comment on this?
Absolutely, Bill. You jump in anytime. I will be quiet and let you speak your brilliance.
No. It's great, and I want to just point something out here in terms of these two angles and the mechanisms being utilized here, and I know you're going to get into that a little bit deeper, but Michol, is it safe to say, we talk a lot about what type of athlete are we dealing with? Are they a fascia connective tissue driven athlete? Are they more of a muscular driven athlete, if you will? They're homeostatic drivers, right? Someone who puts more lean muscle tissue on easier than the next guy. The example I always like to use is Kevin Durant and LeBron James, right? Who's the muscular driven athlete just by looking at them. So when you look at this example, just to for people to start to understand, when you look at these angles, when you look at the right, you have more of a bend at the knee. There's more muscular, safe to say, more muscular driven forces compared to the left in terms of more elastic, spring related forces. Is that something you would share?
Yeah, I think that what you're pointing out, Bill, which is important to point out, is that not only do we have different fiber types and different percentages of fiber types from human to human, We have different somatotypes, which is your ectomorph, your mesomorph, and your endomorph, being your runner versus sprinter and the natural kind of genetics of it. And then what you're also pointing out, Bill, is that we contribute to certain movements differently. So I may be more of a certain somatotype. I may have more, kind of hardwired systems and you use the example muscular versus fascial, and yet we still use all of them. But what you're pointing out is I may use a higher contribution of one versus the other, which is actually true. And not only internal to our body, but what we're about to see is, you're right, Thomas is using more muscular load here. He is going through an isometric contraction more so than Stefan Ohm, although Stefan Ohm is also going through it, but not as demonstratively. So he is loading his knee position, his knee angle, Donald Thomas is, to a greater degree, contributing more, let's say, muscular eccentric force production or force. They're generating potential kinetic energy, right? You're storing in the muscle. Whereas Ohm is actually interested in something different. He's actually interested in being stiff and not bending and not contributing more muscular load, because what he wants to do is actually get more force into the ground. And what we talk about is the first derivative of power for any upright athlete is ground reaction force. So if I can push harder into the ground, hence the ground is going to push harder back at me. In order to do that, I think, Bill, what you're pointing out is that I better have not only strong muscles, I better have a strong connective tissue, fibrous connective tissue system. And that fascial system is a huge contributor to shape stability, as we are about to find out. And so, yeah, I think you're right in the sense that we are using different forces outside of our body, which is physics, as well as the tissue inside our body, which is the biological sciences, which are different than the physical sciences, which are Newton's 3 laws. But those converge into creating some sort of output, right? Athleticism, we're going to call it. So I think you're right. Any other comments to that, Bill? And then we're going to kind of go through what you're talking about here in these slides.
Yeah, no, I know. I know you are. Obviously we've gone through this a number of times. Absolutely. No, continue. I just wanted the group to start to understand, obviously based on an athlete's, size, limb lengths, genetic potential, they have different drivers, different homeostatic drivers. And then obviously the coach, it's our job to be able to look at that athlete, look at their size, look at their genetic gifts or lack of thereof, and then what do we need to do to develop them to maximize performance and minimize injury. And that's what we're going to talk about now. And these two athletes are great examples of coaches doing that.
Yeah, we're using this as a backdrop just to kind of create some relevancy and some perspective. So with Donald Thomas, as you might expect, his technique wouldn't be considered, in quotations, ideal. Although he was an elite jumper, what coaches would say is his technique is not ideal. He just has natural jumping ability. And so what you might expect is, as they got their hands on him, they said, okay, let's refine his technique, and I'll tell you what happened as a result of. So his technique would be more raw, but his natural gifts and natural jumping ability and his timing are very good. And so what they wanted to do is refine his technique to make him even better, because he was already world class, which is kind of interesting. What you find here genetically is that Donald Thomas has long tendons and a short muscle belly, and he can capture a lot of potential energy within the Achilles tendon, within the muscle and some of the soft tissue or the fibrous connective tissue, and he can explode off of that. So he's taken advantage of muscle and fascia to spring off of and to jump, almost like a kangaroo would if they were to bound, and they can bound 20, 25 feet in one bound with very minimal energy leaks and energy cost. They're much more efficient bounding than they are walking. So that storage and release of kinetic energy is very efficient when it's done with the elastic bands, i.e. our fascias of the body, because to a large degree they're metabolically neutral, right? They don't take any substrates, they don't take any fuel requirements to be able to spring and unload via a load. So his technique is raw, but his natural talent is very good. He uses more muscular load and unload to achieve his goal. I want to make sure I'm clear here that he's not using exclusively muscle. He's just contributing more of his muscular system as well as his Achilles tendon to get the job done. So that's okay. And that's one way in which we can do it. It costs a little bit more metabolically, but if you're an elite high jumper, it doesn't matter because you just run towards the bar, jump over it, and then you've got like a 10 or 15 minute rest between. So that's never a limiting factor in his performance. So if you look at him now and you were to assess his jumping ability just by virtue of muscular load and unload. So now what you see is his vertical jump, which requires a huge degree of muscular force to unload to propel himself up. So you've got the swinging of the arms, you've got the timing of upper to lower body, you've got a huge degree of force production in an unload, i.e. a concentric force production. And voila, you've got now a result in that he can jump higher than the average NBA player from a standing vertical jump, which requires a lot of timing, a lot of force production, a lot of sequencing, and muscular unload. If you take a look at his standing position, he can almost jump over me, right? Just by virtue of just a standstill, so that you could see a huge muscular unload, a huge muscular load, and then a huge muscular unload, meaning a force production concentrically, and he takes flight and he jumps over the bar. So that's pretty darn good. Now let's compare that to the shorter Stefan Olm. So again, going back, if you were the high jump coach and you were looking at his height and saying, well, all right, that's not ideal, but let's see his vertical jump. Let's take a look at his ability to use muscular force in not isolation, but more of a main contributor to this action. So you'd expect him to be very, very good. And yet what we see is he is very, very bad. So just by virtue of using muscle and muscle alone, and by the way, he's a muscular fella, but by using muscle and muscle alone, he cannot jump that high at all. And so right away, as a high jump coach, you might think, well, he's not that tall, as well as he cannot jump that high. How is he one of the best jumpers of all time? And to your earlier point, Bill, this is going to be where we take a look at other contributing factors, not just motor units, so not just nerve to depolarize a muscle to get a muscle to contract concentrically to produce force. There's much more going on. And I would also say that if we are using a vertical jump as the only significant measure of effect of the person's ability to produce force, then I think we are to a certain degree misguided in all of the factors that go in to making someone powerful, athletic, and creating a performance result. So far we've got not a very tall gentleman and not an effective jumper when he's standing still. We talked about the takeoff, right? So more knee bend here, more muscular unload. And then for Stefan Olm, obviously less knee bend, which is now more stiffness and more contribution from other things, i.e. the ground or the fascial elements of the body. So when you look at it, there's your takeoff. We know that one's more stiff than the other, and it makes sense because Stefan Olm can't jump that high. So he's relying on stiffness more than he is relying on muscular concentric force production. So if we look at that, he's got two huge constraints. He's not that tall. He doesn't have a good vertical jump when he's standing still. When he is standing still. So what he does have is one of the fastest takeoff speeds of any elite jumper that has been jumping. So he runs towards the bar at 30 kilometers an hour, which is about, I believe, 22 miles an hour. So what he has is immense speed towards the bar. And what he uses is, if you could well imagine, if you're running fast and you've got to take all that speed and plant it into the ground, you know that you're going to push into the ground harder. And once one pushes into the ground harder, obviously the ground pushes back harder. And what he takes advantage of is that. What he cannot do is bleed any ground reaction force energy, because he has to use as much pushback from the ground as he possibly can in order to offset the constraints that he has. In other words, he's not that tall and he doesn't have a good vertical jump when he's standing still. So he takes that speed and he combines it with ideal technique, right? And so he runs towards the bar, he arches his back, right? He's got that head whip. He takes his center of mass and he keeps it as low as possible by getting a huge arch in his back, and he whips his feet over so that he doesn't have to clear the bar with his center of mass. He only has to clear the bar with his body. So when you look at it and you compare now his, let's say, non-ideal vertical jump when he's standing still, if we take that same idea, but now we put it in motion, and I hope this comes through and it's not as glitchy, but what you see here is he's bounding. And if it is coming through and it's a little glitchy, let me describe. He is bounding across the ground like a gazelle. And just like a gazelle, he's taking advantage of that bound. Now, what you see here is that when he's running, he can take advantage of jumping over, taking advantage of ground reaction force. And this is a great viewpoint here. He can almost jump over himself every time because now he's taking advantage of ground reaction force and stiffness. Now, here's a big distinguishing factor. He has been doing these bounding exercises since he was 15 years old. So what he's done is he's basically come in contact with the ground with high velocity. Because of that, as his system developed, his fibroblasts, which are cells within connective tissue fascia, they are signaled to remodel to produce more elastin and more collagen and reticulin. And that makes him strong or stronger than the average athlete so that he can essentially bounce off the ground and take advantage of ground reaction force. That he can do to a much better degree than his fellow competitors. How do we know? Because his tendons are 4 times as strong as the average man. Why? Because he has to do this. He runs very fast towards the bar, then he leans back and puts all of that momentum of his mass into the ground. He puts on the brakes with a stiff knee, a stiff ankle, and a stiff hip. Why? Because the ground is now going to push back at him with about 650 kilograms of force, which would be well over 1,000 pounds of force on one leg as his foot's going through violent eversion. And he takes advantage of that to create a torque conversion where his body can convert that linear motion into triplanar force, ground reaction force that propels him in a pivot, in a turn, as he goes over the bar. If the average person were to do this within about 3 or 4 jumps, they would have compartment syndrome right away, which means the interosseous membrane between the tibia and the fibula would get stretched so violently that you'd have shin splints, and then you couldn't be able to walk or jump or run. He's able to harness this because he has put force through his fascial system, allowing him more ground reaction force so he can essentially bounce off the ground, because his structure is 4 times as strong as the average man, because he put force through it since age 15 in a violent way. And that progressive overload, the said principle, takes over and says, all right, we're going to make that structure really, really strong. So what he does is he takes advantage of more fascial structure. This is not to suggest that he's not using muscular contraction. It's not to suggest that he is not contributing with force production of his motor units. It's not to suggest he's not very muscular, because he is. And it's not to suggest he doesn't have a lot of type 2 muscle, because he does. He's just using more fascial structures than his fellow competitors, and he's trained that way. So what's kind of cool about this is that now we take a look at not just nerves and muscles in order for us to create a good athlete. We take a look at the entire system. So we're going to take a look in a second of how he does it. Before we jump to that, though, let's take a look at the fascial system. It is
Michol,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add one thing to the Parisi coaches online here, is that for the longest time, the pre-C training system, what we've been doing, our active dynamic warm-up, our movement skill training, all of our set protocols, our acceleration, change of direction, all the drills that we do, the workouts for kids to come in 2-3 days a week and go through these movement skills. We are not only developing the cardiovascular system, which we all know, somewhat of the muscular system, but predominantly the fascia and connective tissue systems. And this is what really helps, validate the science behind what we do, because of practicing these movement techniques and putting forces through our body from different angles and different vectors. In addition to getting strong in the weight room, that plays a role in improving speed. And what you're going to also see, in addition to more stress on the fascia connective tissue system through modalities that Michol has created and developed with Viper, that only adds to the ability to create more ground reaction forces to jump higher and run faster. So, this is relatively a new science that we're sharing. Not many people even are aware of the fascia system and what Michol is sharing, what I've been sharing for the last couple of years. Really, really important that everyone knows. This really helps to validate what we're doing. So this webinar is just as much of a validation than as well as an education. But go ahead, Michol. This is a great slide.
Yeah, and I think you've nailed it. When you talk about speed, we talk about all facets of it. So a lot of times when you're thinking about the idea of athleticism and speed for, let's say, football, and we look at second layer or second level speed, and what I mean by that is when I go past the first layer of defense as a running back, let's say, and I get through the first layer and I start to get to the secondary, yeah, it's an all-out race to the end zone. So now that's about linear speed, and it's all about the ability for me to have technique and force production and all those nice things, efficiency and mitigation of fatigue and all those things, which is good and it's valuable. And I think linear speed and acceleration are going to be important at that point. However, I would also say that in a multi-directional athletic endeavor like football or any sport that changes direction, tennis, basketball, what have you, we look at the first layer of defense, if we're using the football analogy, which is it's not only about acceleration, it's about how quickly I can stop relative to my opponent. Because if I can change directions quicker than the linebacker, then I've got an advantage, because we're darting one direction. I plant into the ground like Stefan Olm. I can plant into the ground and change directions and use ground reaction force to propel me to change my momentum of my mass. And if I can do that quicker than my opponent, that deceleration ability is the advantage in the first layer of defense. That's how I get past the first layer of defense. It's not strict acceleration. It's stopping and starting and stopping and starting. And if I can change direction, that is hugely advantageous before I get to the foot race in the secondary towards the end zone. So I think those two things are going to be critical. And what puts on the brakes, yes, is the muscular system, but this fascial network that we saw with Stefan Olm is critically important to put our force into the ground and have the ground reaction be a harnessing leverage or a multiplier for us to be able to accelerate out of it, right? So I push into the ground pushes back at me, and I take advantage of that. That's where the physical sciences enhance the biological sciences. And so that's really critically important. So this fascial structure is an omnidirectional structure that lays its tissue down in relative to forces that are omnidirectional, because it's like a spider web, and it loves different speeds with different loads at different angles. And so we train it with different speeds at different loads with different angles. And that's what we did when you were back on the farm, right? Which is why farm kids tend to be very, very strong, particularly in uncommon positions, because they train a lot of structure, not just the muscular structure. So here you see a fascial aponeurosis that's all dried out and dead. Here you see a fascial aponeurosis that is living. And the first thing you're going to notice between the two is one looks very plastic, which was the previous picture. This one looks very aqueous and very, I'll say, call it collagenous, right? Very gel-like, very jello-like. And that is the difference between tissue that is dehydrated and tissue that is rich with binded water proteins that allow for better shape stability and more dynamism within the tissue. So, it's been said with Thomas Myers and others that, even as it relates to tissues, the aging process is a process of dehydration. And so what we want to do is we want to fortify the tissues with good training, but also good nutrition and good hydration strategies and good movement strategies throughout the day to keep this tissue super hydrated. And so when we look at it, we often think about movement as a muscle bone concept, right? Muscles create a depolarization. They create an action potential where they contract. So the inside of the muscle belly depolarizes. Actin and myosin see each other. They produce a power stroke that moves a bone, and that is movement. And so while that is true, it's incomplete, because the muscle bone concept presented in most of our standard anatomical description gives a purely mechanical model of movement where levers and other things tend to exist. But in reality, there is a seamless picture of integration that is viewed in a living body, right? So if I'm standing up, gravity's pulling me down, and if I let gravity pull me down, it collapses my joints and bends my joints, which was not a product of any muscular force. So what moves my joints is not just a muscle and bone concept. It is mass, it is momentum, it is gravity, it is ground reaction force. It is all these things that act on my body. My body takes advantage of them in a very seamless, integrated, and coordinated way. So when one part of my body moves, the whole body responds. So functionally, the best tissue that can mediate this responsiveness is the connective tissue, which is why we have it, or one reason why we have it. It keeps everything together, and it's not an inert tissue. It stretches, it rebounds like an elastic band. It contributes to shape stability. It allows us to be more athletic. It helps us be more stable at joints so we can be healthier. It is a contributor to overall well-being and performance. So real quick, fascia has cells which produce fibers, and those fibers live in the ECM, the extracellular matrix. Extra means outside of the cell, so in that ground substance. And then within fascia, there's water, bound and unbound water. And so what's important for us to realize is that one of the cells that fascia has are fibroblasts. And just like bone cells, which are osteoblasts, or osteocytes rather, bone cells, we've got osteoblasts in bone that are cells that produce calcium and collagen and lay the matrix out of the bone. So in order for bone to get stronger, it has to have a signaling mechanism. And that signaling mechanism is force. And that's called mechanotransduction. I force the bone, and the bone, if it's the right dosage, the bone will react to that signal by converting the mechanical signal into cellular activity. In other words, in the bone, an osteoblast will produce more bone. When you go into outer space, or you lay down for too much, or you sit for too much, you start to pee out calcium via uric acid in your pee. So you start to lose bone density, and you start to pee it out, essentially, when there's not enough force in the body. People who chronically sit at their desk, people who are bedridden, astronauts that go into outer space do not get enough force on their bone. Therefore, their bone demineralizes. So the idea is we need to put force through our system. Fascia is no different, right? So fibroblasts recognize force. That is the signaling agent for them to remodel. And if we can change the speed, change the direction of load, the vector, and change the force, those speed, load, and direction changes are vital inputs to authenticate the remodeling, the effective remodeling of fascia. So that's it. Like, we want to change the speed, the force, and the load, and we want to do that as an anatomically adaptive, or if we're going through periodization, it's anatomical adaptation. That's how we get the system strong, so we can rev the engine more. So think about car analogy. When we're in the gym and we're doing our weightlifting, yeah, we're creating a bigger engine. But the question is our chassis strong enough to support that engine? And the fascia is the chassis of your body. It is the chassis of the car, and it is the one that keeps everything together. And not only is that chassis good to keep the car together, it's also a car that it's biological tissue, so it can actually produce force when it's acted upon. So that's critically important, right? When we train this structure, we want to signal the fibroblasts to lay down collagen and elastin and reticulin, which is native collagen. And collagen and elastin are going to be critically important to return energy, right? To make us elastic and to give us shape stability body-wide. So real quick, I don't know if Bill, you want to add to that, but real quick, collagen is a triple helix. So think about a strand of hair that's twirling around. And when a collagen strand gets tangled up to an adjacent collagen strand, as you can well imagine, a triple helix coiled amino acid structure, if it gets tangled up with an adjacent collagen, that creates shape stability. Because imagine if you had a bunch of hair that was all tangled up and it was tangled up with another strand of hair, that gives you shape stability. Just, if you have a daughter or a son and you're trying to comb their hair and, they're all ratted up in terms of the hair tangled up with each other, that's pretty hard to untangle. And it's pretty hard to comb the hair. That hair is pretty locked in. And that's a good thing for skin. It's a good thing for bone. It's a good thing for fascia because collagen adds shape stability. And when we have shape stability body-wide, that's good because we can increase force production, right? As Paul Chek used to always say, you cannot fire a cannon from a canoe. In other words, your body cannot produce force in the muscular system when it's unstable. And stability is not a muscular conversation alone. Skin, fascia, bone, with collagen all add shape stability. Just think of your skin as your biological weightlifting suit. The younger it is or the younger it acts, the more shape stabilizing benefits it gives you. So that's critically important. Fascia also has these binding sites for water, like the sponge, right? This lattice work of binding sites. When water is bound, it actually makes the fascia behave in two ways. It's stiffer and more dynamic. So think about your weightlifting suit ratcheting up on your body more, and it's more elastic, giving you more force potential. So putting water and binding it to these binding sites, these sugar receptors in fascia, critically important. How do we do it? We eat fresh food and drink plenty of water throughout the day, and we move our bodies and we create pressure gradients because that pushes water to bind to sugar receptors in fascia. So movement throughout the day, self-myofascial release, what we call fluid dynamics at IOM. We've got a whole protocol for how to move fluid around the body so it can enhance the tissue behaviors and set the conditions up right at the level of the cell and of the level at the tissue so that that tissue can have a better ability to perform optimally. So here you see a gristly dehydrated fascia bundle that is in the scapula. Right there, it's pretty fascially stuck and glued down. On the opposite side, it's removed, so you see a lot more freedom of motion. So what we want is fascia to be dynamic, not fibrotic. When a person has an injury and they don't move for a lot of period of time, collagen will still lay down, but the problem is collagen's not laying down relative to movement, so it tends to get sticky and gluey and fibrotic, and that doesn't help movement. It doesn't help force potentiation because instead of being dynamic and shape stabilizing and elastic, it gets fibrotic, sticky, gunked up, and glued down. And the reason is because it wants to enhance shape stability because we've immobilized an injured area. So tissue behaves as the inputs and as the environment dictate around it. So let's go back to Stefan Olm for a second. We looked at his ability to use the ground reaction force. We saw that he was super strong in his fascia. He had good muscular cross-sectional area. He's a muscular guy, and he could produce force, but he really wants to resist force and bounce off the ground. So this is exactly how he does it. So if you were to see that pull, and hopefully it's coming through okay, you're seeing a pull being thrown into the ground. And when you see that pull being thrown into the ground, because it's a pull, it's stiff. And what it does is it bounces over and off the ground and bounces across and goes through an arcing action over the bar. If that stick was a rope, and if it was compliant, meaning it collapsed, that rope would not bounce off the ground. It would yield into the ground. So what Stefan Olm wants to be is he wants to be that stick. He wants to be that pole. He wants to be stiff so he can bounce off the ground. So if you can see this, hopefully you can see it. I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but you see that pole still there because they've superimposed the two images. What you're going to see is Stefan Olm coming up towards the bar. And what's interesting is his last plant is leaning back. Why? Because he wants to take advantage of ground reaction force the way that Newton's 3 laws would do it. So his biological tissue and the biological sciences, the behaviors of those tissue, interact with the physical sciences, Newton's 3 laws and physics. And as soon as he drives into the ground with a super stiff fascial and muscular network, he bounces off the ground, and what takes over is physics. He has the same trajectory as that stiff pole, and he bounces and he goes over the bar. So how he does it is not, I'm going to jump high from a still position using muscle. We already know he can't do that. What he does is he takes advantage of ground reaction force, really strong fascia because he's trained it through the adaptive process to be really strong, and he bounces over the bar. And that is super stiffness, and that is athleticism. So real quick, I'm going to go through these slides relatively quickly in the time that we have. And Bill, I think everybody will have access to these slides so they can take a look at it after the fact. But if we look at some of the Stuart McGill's work on super stiffness, it talks about muscle contraction. And I want to go over this real quick. Muscle contraction occurs rhythmically. So if speed is our game, we want to have a situation where we teach the muscles to turn on and to turn off. And at IOM, we have an activation sequencing that has 4 steps to it. The first one is fluid dynamics. The next one is what we call small motor unit recruitment. And the third step is excitation. And excitation is 2 things. It's teaching the muscles to turn on and to turn off. Because a muscle that can turn off quick is that's speed. A muscle that turns off slow or does not turn off is slow. So think about this, an athlete, off is quick and on is slow. Muscles that stay on make the athlete slower. So we want the muscles to turn off. In order for the muscles to turn off, the nervous system has to recognize safety. What recognizes safety is a stable structure. And a stable structure is given to us by healthy and stable skin, healthy and stable fascia, and muscles that can create, at the level of the joint, can fire in a coordinated manner to create joint health and joint stability. So muscle, skin, fascia all coordinate itself to create stiffness in the system. And when the nervous system recognizes that, it turns off quick. And when we do that, we are quick. So that's the first key, is we want healthy skin and fascia to support a muscle turning off, to support a quick athlete. So we train it that way. So, you know, the idea here is that too many coaches train for speed with more strengthening and more strengthening and more strengthening, teaching the muscle to stay on and on and on and on and on, never teaching that muscle to turn off. And if we can, which we do, teach muscles to turn off quick, and we've got a whole protocol for this, that enhances speed because we enhance the ability for the system to be strong. Muscles have 4 properties. One of them is elasticity. The other one is extensibility, right? So I can stretch and then I can elastically recoil. Fascia is the same thing. Fascia is a bunch of elastic band, so is skin. Think about your skin versus your grandma's skin. One of them is elastic and one of them is not. If you take grandma or grandpa's skin and you stretch it, it stays there. And it recoils very slowly over time. Whereas a young person's skin is elastic. Hallelujah, because the skin is our heaviest organ. And it would be a penalty to the muscular system, the cardiovascular system, and our skeletal system if it had to carry the bag of skin around for a lifetime, and that skin had no contribution to motion. Luckily, Mother Nature, she's way too smart. She put a bag of skin on us, which is our heaviest organ, and said, don't worry, it's elastic. It'll contribute to movement so far as it's healthy. So we want to put force through skin because as it remodels, it puts collagen and elastin in skin, and that makes our skin super stiff and super stretchy. And that is like wearing an Olympic weightlifting suit that can hugely contribute to force and stability. So we want a compliant but stiff system. We want skin, muscle, and fascia that is not too compliant. In other words, it doesn't stretch too much, yet it's not too stiff, right? So it stretches a little bit and then recoils with force, right? So doing yoga and just getting range of motion for range of motion's sake has a law of diminishing returns. The tissue will become too compliant and not stiff enough to be able to allow for recoil. If the system is too stiff, we can't get an effective load into the tissues. So we want that kind of happy milieu between, having enough stretch and not having enough, right? So we want to have enough stretch and not, and basically enough stretch to accentuate the force and the outcomes, and not too stiff. So that's kind of some of the aspects of the elastic components. Now, one quick thing, if we think about a maximal sweeping contraction of muscle in order to create this muscle stiffness, we do not need to have it, right? The idea of 25% muscle voluntary contraction creates typically a pretty good zone of muscle stiffness. So if I'm teaching my athletes to be quick and I'm saying, keep your core tight, that is over stiffening the system. We don't need that much contribution. So we want to have a heightened reactivity with not too much activation of muscles, because that makes the system too stiff, right? So we don't need a lot of muscle contraction to stiffen up the system. In many cases, around 25% is all we need. So if I'm telling my athlete to stiffen the core, that is just over recruiting and making me too stiff. Now, when muscles all stiffen together with the skin and with the fascial system, that creates what Stuart McGill would deem super stiffness, which is this idea of aggregation of the total contribution of all the systems of the body, and that creates a nice effect. So when Stefan Ohm was getting into the ground, that last pulse into the ground, he would stiffen his system completely from his eyes to his toes. His whole body would stiffen for a moment, for a fraction of a second, and he would stiffen into the ground. He would become stiff and bounce off the ground and then relax again in the air so that he can bend and arch his back and get over the bar. So that idea of super stiffness in a moment of time is the ability to transfer force from his body into the ground and get more ground reaction force. He takes advantage of his environment, making it more effective as a result. And so if we think about the interweaving of all four layers of the abdominal wall, when they all fire together, they create a weave of super stiffness, right? So they all contribute together and they all help each other anchor to something more stiff. So we do a lot of this type of thing when we do forced breathing. So we contribute all the accessory stability muscles of the lumbopelvic hip complex. We contribute and we fire them all together. And we do that through the actions of labored or forced breathing, knowing that forced breathing calls upon all these accessory breathing muscles, which are all stability-based muscles, right? And so this binding and weaving of muscles together is where we enhance super stiffness. So right away, we've taken a look at that. Now we look at a couple of different things, and I'm going to open it up for about 5 minutes of looking at questions, and then we can wrap it up. So the idea of directing neural flow is also important. When I train one element of my body, there's a neural impact body-wide, right? So the research is really, I exercise one arm and there's an untrained arm, and I don't do anything to that other arm, but my strength in my untrained arm goes up in time too. Why? Because the nervous system gets better. So if we teach the muscles and the nervous system to turn on and off quick and to turn on and off quick because the skin and the fascia are strong, they're elastic, they're shape stabilizing, then my body's acting like one unified system. And when it does, now we're getting the benefit of all of that orchestra playing together. And we're not just saying we're going to train the muscles and the nerves today. It's important that we train the entire system. So we want to train muscles on and off. And when muscles go off, what gives us stability is fascia, skin, everything else. And those are critically important. The other thing to acceleration and deceleration and speed and quickness is all about energy leaks, right? So the idea of not having unwanted movement at certain segments requires stiffness or competency at every joint in the body. And what contributes to that, again, is the fascial network as well as muscles turning on and off at the right time. So, you know, that's what we look at. The last one is this idea of the kangaroo. So elite runners run largely off of passive tissue, not muscle. So they're springing off their fascial system, just like a kangaroo. That makes them super efficient. So if I can lower my command of oxygen utilization as an aerobic athlete, a runner, and I don't have to use as much energy, two things happen. I can conserve energy longer, and I can actually run at a higher relative intensity because my VO2 doesn't go as high, doesn't cross threshold. And when it doesn't cross threshold, I don't now produce metabolites of fatigue because I'm not using muscle, or not as much rather. And I can save metabolic waste. And when I do, I last longer. So that is critically important. I run off of passive structures because my passive structures are strong. And that strength is going to enhance my ability to be better long term. So with that being said, what I want to do right now is suggest that you never want to stretch a runner or an athlete past their usable angles that they would use in their sport or activity, because you want to create stiffness and you want compliance to that joint angle, but not too much stiffness. So the fascial behavior is listed here. And I'll allow you guys to review this when you review your notes. I just want to show you a couple slides before we wrap up. So we want to have, and we want to adhere to these training adaptations, or these keys to training rather, so we can adapt appropriately, right? We want to use different forces, different directions. We want to train in intervals. We want to make use of gravity and ground reaction force. We want to use rhythmical motion. And it looks a little bit like this. If we're going to use body weight activity, we can start off slow. And we could say, all right, we're going to go into an anatomical adaptation phase, right? What we're doing here is we're coordinating a multi-directional environment. We're using the shoulder girdle, the hip structures, the feet. And all we're doing here is we're going from a compressed to an extended body position. That's moving fluid around. That is pushing water, blood, and lymph into different kind of cavities within the body, because we're going from a compressed on the ground to an extended standing up. And we're doing it in a lot of different ways. We call these things ground to standing exercises, or what we call, you can call them get ups and get downs. So another example would be, I believe it's going to play right here. So we're going to go into a little bit more of a multi-directional environment. Our goal is in time to increase the person's capacity to be able to accept forces in different speeds with different loads at different angles. So we're going to move the hip joints and the thoracic spine in different ways so that we can be effective. When we add load, we use obviously Viper a lot. In this case, you see a Viper Pro in front of you, but we're taking a mass. So don't really be too concerned that it's a Viper. It could be any mass. And what we want to do is we want to create a multi-directional force production environment, right? So our body is accepting force in omnidirectional ways, and it is producing force in omnidirectional ways. And in order for us to do that, we're going to get more force into the tissues in an omnidirectional way and be able to teach our nervous system and our muscular system to produce force in a variety of different ways. This is your farm kid analogy right here. right? This is what makes farm kids strong, is they do this all day long. They move mass in uncommon, what we call odd positions, and they do it all day long. So what happens is their nervous system, their skin, their fascia, their muscles, etc., their joints become highly attuned to these loading parameters. And because of that, they create an outcome. They are strong in uncommon positions. And they're typically pretty good athletes when it comes to odd positions. Now, two things begin to happen is we increase athleticism and we decrease the risk of soft tissue injuries now. We are bulletproofing an athlete, making them unbreakable. And that is our goal, right? The best ability for an athlete is availability. And if they're not injured and they're available because we have now set up an unbreakable structure, that's better for them, right? They're not going to succumb to the degradation of loading and then injury that comes as a result of. So these are just examples. Again, you're going to get all these videos as well, but this is an example of a multi-directional force production environment, right? We're producing force in a variety of different ways. We're accepting force in a variety of different ways. The lateral line here is being loaded right there as they're decelerating to the side, right? So think about the peroneals, the lateral thigh, the lateral abdominal obliques, the lateral thorax, the lats, the axilla, which is your armpit, the tricep. They're all decelerating as Trevor's taking the mass to the opposite side. Okay, what we're doing here is this is a dead start, so we're producing force production straight up from a resting position, and it is asymmetrically loading. Okay, from here again, just loading the pattern in the frontal plane in a staggered stance. From right now, we're going to take a look at rate of force production. So now it's all about, can I actually turn the system on and off quickly in order to express strength or force? So strength expressed is power. And so these are power exercises. They're just multi-directional power exercises. So this is an acceleration, multi-directional rate of force production. Can I produce power in a multi-directional environment? So this is explosive acceleration. We can do it in the opposite and go deceleration again as well, or conversion. But you're just seeing examples of how a person can accelerate in a multi-directional environment, enhancing their ability to contribute the rate of force production, the contribution of elastic potential in the skin and fascia, and the ability to be able to convert that to athleticism. So this is where the body in its entirety is coming together, right? What has to put on the brakes is going to be fascia as well as eccentric muscle contraction. And what creates quickness is the ground reaction force. And if it's change of direction based, it's going to be largely contributive of skin, fascia, as well as the nerves and muscles, right? So right here, we are accelerating and then decelerating an action, making the individual more athletic, right? So you just see examples of these. Now, again, it's not super important that they're exclusively with the Viper. This is, just because we work with it so much, this is what we do. But take the idea of and the contribution and the themes of what we're doing and try to apply it to our young athletes in order for them to be bigger, stronger, faster. So right here is an acceleration drill. The key here is there's 3 points of contact. For the young developing athlete, this gives them more balance and motor control as they work on acceleration. So if you want more exercise examples, you can jump on this website. But Bill, I think in reference to the presentation, I think it would be beneficial if the individuals did receive these as well. And I want to be respectful of time as well. So, if there are any questions, I have a few minutes right now, but I will just say that big thanks to you, Bill, and the team. One of the sayings that we hang our hat on is, if you want to go fast, this is not fast in terms of athletic, but it's fast in life, right? Go alone. But if you want to go far in life, go together. And so to us, we always say that that's 20x, which means, individuals are 20 times as strong when they rely on the fellowship and the tribe and the friendship and support of others versus alone. So with that sentiment, we appreciate you, Bill, and the team at Parisi. You guys are part of our 20X for sure. And it makes our industry better when, we can collaborate the way we have. So big thanks to you, Bill. I don't know if there's any questions. I know that I was kind of going hyper drive there at the last part, but I did want to be respectful.
I know Ginger, if Ginger has any questions, maybe people can type in or write in or whatnot. I don't know if we're going to unmute, but I just want to say, Michol, once again, fabulous job. So eloquently presented, the attention to detail, the information that you shared is just so dead on and so accurate and so relevant to what we do. So I really think it's important that our coaches understand that this relationship with Michol Dalcourt and Institute of Motion it's been ongoing for the last couple years. Now we're taking it to the next level. We're actually incorporating very specific fascia-related training on our online system, utilizing the Viper, utilizing some other tools that Michol has helped not only develop but help take advantage of. And we're excited about the relationship. So as you can see, this is rooted in science. What Michol has talked about is deeply rooted into a hard science, real proven accurate science of the fascia system. What's so exciting is that we're on the cutting edge of it. The information that all of you just saw isn't really out there. Most strength coaches, strength and conditioning coaches, performance coaches, fitness enthusiasts, or professional fitness trainers are not very familiar with this science and the application of it. So, myself diving into this thing in the last couple of years, Michol has been rooted into the science of fascia for over a decade, where I've been rooted into it probably for about three to 4 years now. And that's where we developed our relationship. So, Ginger, are there any questions? I know we went over about 15 minutes, but well worth it. I know some people had to jump off, but does anybody have any questions?
Hey, Bill, I am going to unmute everybody for just a moment to see if there are, in fact, questions. For those of you who may have some issues with audio or be uncomfortable sharing aloud, you are welcome to submit your questions through the dashboard. I'll be happy to share them. So
Yeah, I would recommend.
Everybody should be unmuted now. Unless you have self-muted, you can unmute yourself. But if you do have questions, you are more than welcome to share them at this time.
Yeah, or type in questions if you guys have any.
Yeah, and as they're perhaps thinking about questions and formulating them, this session is being also recorded, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect. So, what I'll do, Bill, is I'll circulate these slides to you guys for handing out, and utilizing this as the resource. Even if questions do float in later on, obviously, Bill, we want to make ourselves accessible to the team. So.
Yeah, and I think we're a little behind here, and I want to respect everybody's time. Michol, you did an incredible job. I feel the way to go is at this point, if anybody has follow-up questions, you can email them in to myself, and we'll do a follow-up education with Michol for sure. But the exciting news, guys, is that we're adding modules to our Train Heroic system that's going to incorporate very specific fascia-related training, fascia warm-ups. We're going to be, showing how to utilize the Viper, which is a great tool, along with med balls and other great tools. But listen, we've gotten Vipers in Fairlawn about a year ago. I got them in my house. They're just incredible tools. I'm using them with my athletes, using them with my sons that are right in the thick of high school athletics, a senior now and a sophomore football and basketball player, competing at a very competitive high school, Don Bosco, and, using this stuff on them a lot, and the results have been incredible. And, again, we have them in Fairlawn, so we want to make sure you guys understand the science behind fascia training. And like you said, a Viper, a med ball, a kettlebell, these are all important tools on how and knowing how to use them to address the fascia connective tissue system. And we're going to be coming out with those specific workouts and exercise routines specifically to fascia in conjunction with Michol and also a lot of the top experts in the world. I've been elected, actually, believe it or not, to be on the board of directors of the Fascia Research Society, which is the top research professionals in the world around fascia. That's where we get a lot of our information from. Myself, obviously, Michol, Tom Myers, it's all derived from a lot of these guys that are part of that research group, and Carla Stucco and Robert Schleip and Tom Finley, all these top PhDs. But Michol, you do the best job explaining this to our industry. Really bridging the science to application better than anybody else, and that's why I really value the relationship, and I've learned so much from you, and I'm so excited that you're here sharing it with our team, and that's what it's about, guys. It's not about egos. It's about just finding the best, collaborating, and I said that in a newsletter. It's all about collaboration. That's what I do at my level, and we have to do it at all levels. So with that said, Michol, I want to thank you so much. Ginger, I don't know if you have any other closing remarks, or Randy, before we close down. Or Michol, I just want to give you one more chance to say anything before we close out the webinar.
No, just a big heartfelt thanks to everyone, and I appreciate your time and look forward to the continued journey.
Yes, thanks to you, Michelle. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Unfortunately, Ginger had some tech issues, so I don't know. I think she can see us but not hear us. I'm not quite sure. So certainly, if she's got any follow up, I will allow her to do so. And just again to reiterate, thank you for spending the time with us today.
Yep.
Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Randy. Thanks again, Michol. It was unbelievable. Beat expectations once again. And thank you, team, for joining. We'll be sure to get this out to the entire network.
Thanks so much, guys. Have a good day, everyone.
You too. Thanks. Bye-bye.